used to think people remembered conversations as a whole, that if you explained yourself clearly enough, it would all stick. But over time, I noticed something unsettling. People would remember how I started talking and how I ended. Everything in between felt invisible. Maybe you felt this too. You walk away from a conversation feeling like you shared a lot. But later, the other person recalls just one early moment and one final line. Not the effort, not the details, just the opening impression and the closing feeling. That's not forgetfulness. That's psychology. Your brain isn't designed to store everything evenly. It anchors memory at the edges. And once you see this pattern, you stop trying to be memorable all the time. You focus on the moments that actually matter. There's a well-documented memory pattern behind this. It's called the serial position effect. When your brain takes in a sequence of information, it doesn't store each part equally. The first items get more attention. They're processed with less mental clutter. That's the primacy effect. Early information is encoded more deeply into long-term memory. The last items are different. They're still active in working memory. That's the recency effect. What comes last is easiest to retrieve. Everything in the middle competes for limited resources. Cognitive load increases. Interference sets in. So recall drops. This isn't about intelligence or interest. It's about how memory naturally organizes experience. And once you understand this structure, a lot of confusing social moments start to make sense. I remember leaving a conversation feeling like I'd done everything right. I listened, I explained, I stayed engaged. It felt full, almost productive. But later, when it came up again, something felt off. The other person referenced the opening moment and the final exchange. Everything else had vanished, not because it wasn't meaningful to me, because it never anchored in their mind. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Effort doesn't equal memorability. The brain doesn't reward consistency. It rewards contrast. And without realizing it, I had placed all my energy in the part people remember least. The brain pays extra attention at the beginning because nothing else is competing yet. Early information benefits from attentional priority. Working memory is still clear. This allows deeper encoding into long-term memory. Repetition isn't required. Clarity is. Research on memory encoding shows that first items are rehearsed more often internally, not consciously, automatically. They also shape the mental frame for what follows. This is known as schema formation. Once a frame is set, new information is filtered through it. That's why first impressions are so powerful. They don't just get remembered, they organize everything that comes after. There are people you met once, years ago. You don't remember the conversation, you don't remember what you talked about, but you remember how you felt in the first minute. Calm, guarded, seen. That early tone never fully left, even as time passed. Later interactions added information, but they didn't overwrite the frame. They just fit inside it. That's the quiet power of beginnings. They don't need to be dramatic. They just need to be clear. Once that opening feeling is set, the mind stops reevaluating from scratch. The end of an interaction works differently. It doesn't rely on deep encoding. It relies on availability. Information presented last is still active in working memory. There's been no time for decay, no interference yet. This makes the final moments easiest to recall. not because they're most important, but because they're most accessible. Psychologists call this retrieval proximity. What's closest to recall time wins. This is why conclusions matter more than explanations, and why last impressions often override middle ones. The brain isn't summarizing. It's grabbing what's still on the surface. I once gave a long presentation full of careful points. I left feeling proud of the details I'd covered. A colleague later told me, I mostly remember your opening story and the last thing you said about the next steps. Everything in between had disappeared. It hit me. People don't carry the middle with them. They carry the edges. The first moment that grabbed them and the last one that lingered. And if the edges aren't strong, the middle doesn't matter. The middle of any sequence suffers from interference. Earlier information competes with later information. Attention fades. Cognitive load rises. Memory researchers call this proactive and retroactive interference. Old items interfere with new ones. New items interfere with old ones. The result? Most of the middle gets lost. This isn't about forgetting because it's unimportant. It's about how our memory system prioritizes edges over the center. So, when you notice conversations or presentations being remembered only at the start and end, this is why. It's the brain's natural way of filtering. I once tried to cram every point into a single meeting. More examples, more explanations, more effort. I left thinking I'd nailed it. But later, the feedback told a different story. People only remembered the first anecdote I shared and the last line I said before leaving the room. All the middle details, the hours I spent explaining, vanished. It was a humbling lesson. More talking doesn't equal more memorability. The brain simply doesn't record everything equally. Understanding the serial position effect changes how you communicate. Leaders, teachers, and influencers don't need to overload people with details. They need to prioritize beginnings and endings. Primacy frames perception. Recency solidifies takeaways. This applies to sales pitches, presentations, dating, and even casual conversations. The middle? Optional. Useful, but not critical. By focusing on these edges, you shape what people actually remember, not just what you said. It's influence without manipulation, just awareness of how memory naturally works. I started experimenting with the edges, opening strong, closing clean, leaving the middle lighter. The change was subtle but noticeable. People started recalling exactly what I wanted them to remember. Not because I forced it, but because I respected how their memory worked. Conversations felt easier. I wasn't trying to fill space anymore. And strangely, I was more confident. Less effort, more impact. That's when I realized the brain rewards strategic simplicity, not quantity. The primacy effect isn't about tricks, it's about clarity and intention. When you lead with your strongest points, you help your listener encode the most important information. No gimmicks required. Psychologists call this ethical framing, structuring information to be memorable without coercion or deception. Opening with clarity sets a mental map. Your audience knows where to focus. They remember what matters most. It's simple, powerful, and human. And it works in conversations, presentations, and even emails. I once ended a meeting with almost nothing. No last-minute points, no extra clarifications. At first, it felt awkward, but later, people remembered the key message perfectly. The pause gave their brain space to anchor the final thought. That moment taught me something powerful. You don't always need to fill the end with words. Silence can highlight what truly matters. Sometimes less isn't just more. It's unforgettable. The brain doesn't just store the last thing, it amplifies emotion. Research in cognitive psychology shows that emotional events are more likely to be consolidated into memory. This is called affective tagging. When your final words or actions carry emotion, surprise, humor, warmth, they stick longer. Even if the content is simple, the emotional weight boosts recall. This is why endings matter more than middle details. It's not just what you say, it's how it feels in the moment. Recency plus emotion equals unforgettable impressions. I've realized something important. People don't remember everything you do. They carry the edges, the first impression you make, and the last feeling you leave behind. The middle? It fades into the background. Not because it's not important, but because the brain filters it out naturally. Once you accept this, you stop over-explaining. You stop trying to be remembered for every word. Instead, you focus on moments that actually anchor in memory. And suddenly, your conversations, presentations, and connections feel lighter and far more effective. Here's the simple mental model. First equals framing. Last equals meaning. Middle equals optional. Primacy sets the tone. It creates the lens through which everything else is seen. Recency locks in the takeaway. It ensures the final impression is remembered. The middle? It fills space, adds context, but rarely sticks. By designing your beginnings and endings intentionally, you work with memory, not against it. And that's the real power of the serial position effect. You don't need to be remembered for everything, just what truly matters. I want you to try something with me right now. Look around and notice the first 5 things you see. Got 'em? Hold on to them in your mind for a moment. Now, can you recall them all? Chances are, a few are already slipping. Maybe that's frustrating, or maybe it feels familiar, because this is exactly how your short-term memory works every single day, silently deciding what sticks and what vanishes. I remember one morning I walked out the door, convinced I had my wallet, my phone, even my keys. 10 steps later, panic. Nothing in my hands. My brain had simply let the information fade. What if I told you that moment of forgetting isn't just random? That your short-term memory follows secret rules, tricks, and patterns that scientists have been studying for decades. And here's the best part. You can actually test it for yourself right now. Short-term memory, or STM, is your brain's workbench for holding information temporarily. Think of it as a mental sticky note. You jot something down, but it won't stay forever unless you do something with it. Psychologists often contrast it with long-term memory. While long-term memory stores information for years, STM is fleeting, usually lasting 15 to 30 seconds unless actively rehearsed. It's closely tied to working memory, which isn't just storage, it's active processing. Working memory lets you manipulate information, remember a phone number long enough to dial it, or follow the steps of a recipe while cooking. STM has a limited capacity, which is why you might forget details if you try to hold too much at once. Understanding this limit is the first step to mastering your memory. One of the most famous discoveries about short-term memory comes from George Miller. Yeah, back in 1956. He found that on average, people can hold 7 plus or minus 2 items in their STM at once. That means most of us can remember anywhere from 5 to 9 chunks of information, numbers, letters, or even words, before our brains start dropping pieces. Here's where it gets interesting. Our memory isn't fixed to individual items. We can use chunking, grouping smaller bits into meaningful units, to expand our capacity. For example, instead of remembering 19452026, you might chunk it as 1945 and 2026. Suddenly, 2 chunks instead of 7 random digits. This simple trick is a cornerstone of memory improvement. And it's the secret behind why phone numbers, social security numbers, and license plates are designed the way they are. I remember rushing out one morning, juggling a coffee cup and my bag, convinced I had my keys in hand. 10 steps later, my heart sank. I was standing there, empty-handed, staring at the floor. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't distraction. My short-term memory had simply let the information fade in the chaos of the moment. Maybe this sounds familiar to you, those tiny, everyday memory slips that make you question yourself. It's moments like these that show exactly why understanding STM matters. Short-term memory isn't failing you. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do. One major reason we forget is cognitive load. Your brain can only process a limited amount of information at once. When you try to hold too much, some of it simply drops. Another factor is attention residue. If your mind is bouncing between tasks, checking emails while cooking, while remembering your keys, your STM is constantly interrupted. Each switch leaves traces of unfinished thought, making it harder to retain new information. Psychologists also note that distractions reduce encoding. Even small interruptions, like a notification ping, can push important details out of STM. The good news? Understanding these limits allows you to hack your memory. Simple strategies like focusing on one task at a time, repeating information, or chunking details can dramatically improve recall. Let's put your short-term memory to the test. I want you to remember this sequence of letters: F, K, M, R, L. Read them once and don't write anything down. Just hold them in your mind for a few seconds. Now, try to recall them in order. How many did you get right? Did your brain drop a few? That's completely normal. Here's a quick trick. If you say them out loud or create a pattern or story around the letters, you dramatically increase your chance of remembering them. This small exercise shows how STM works in real time and why tiny strategies can make a huge difference. One of the simplest ways to boost short-term memory is rehearsal, repeating information to keep it active in your mind. Psychologists call this maintenance rehearsal. When you repeat a phone number, a sequence of letters, or a new vocabulary word, you give your STM a chance to hold on to it longer. But repetition isn't always enough. That's where chunking comes in. Chunking groups separate pieces of information into meaningful units. For example, instead of trying to remember BTFCLMR, you could chunk them as BTF and CLMR. Suddenly, 2 chunks instead of 7 items, much easier to recall. Research shows that combining rehearsal with chunking dramatically improves memory capacity. Even in everyday life, these techniques help you remember tasks, instructions, or names without relying on external notes. Here's a slightly harder test for you. Try to remember this sequence: CARPTLNS. pause for a few seconds and see how many you can recall. If it feels tricky, don't worry. Your STM is just showing its natural limits. Here's a tip. Turn it into a story or pattern. For example, CAR plus PTL plus NS could become cars parked near streetlights. Suddenly, 8 random letters feel like a meaningful story. This shows how our brain loves patterns and meaning, and why chunking and rehearsal are so powerful in real life. Short-term memory isn't just for memory tests. It shapes nearly everything we do daily. From remembering a colleague's instructions to following a recipe, STM determines how smoothly our day flows. Research shows that we often overestimate our memory capacity. Multitasking, distractions, or information overload can quickly push STM past its limits, causing forgetfulness. That's why external memory aids like notes, reminders, or phone alerts aren't signs of weakness. They're essential tools to manage cognitive load. Psychologists also highlight simple hacks to support STM. Focus on one task at a time, repeat information to yourself, and chunk details into meaningful units. Even taking short breaks between tasks reduces attention residue and strengthens retention. Understanding these principles can transform how you handle learning, work, and daily life. Instead of fighting your memory's limits, you can work with them, designing habits that maximize recall and reduce mental fatigue. I want to leave you with one last story. A few weeks ago, I was at a small cafe, juggling a notebook, my coffee, and a sudden phone call. I tried to remember a list of tasks in my head, but by the time I hung up, half of them were gone. Frustrating, right? That moment made me realize something. Short-term memory isn't about failure. It's about how our brain manages limited resources. Every fleeting thought, every detail we forget, is a signal of our brain's natural limits. Here's the takeaway. Understanding short-term memory lets you work smarter, not harder. Use rehearsal, chunking, and patterns to hold information longer. Minimize distractions and multitasking to reduce cognitive load. And don't be afraid to use external tools. They complement your STM rather than replace it. The free tests you did today weren't just games. They were a glimpse into how your memory actually works. Some letters stuck, some slipped away, and that's normal. By noticing these patterns in everyday life, you can turn small moments of forgetfulness into opportunities to strengthen your memory, stay focused, and remember what truly matters. Short-term memory isn't a limitation. It's a tool, and now you know how to use it. I want you to imagine this for a second. You walk into your kitchen looking for your keys, and they're nowhere to be found. You check the table, your bag, even your pocket. Nothing. Frustration builds. You think, I just had them a minute ago. Or maybe you're mid-conversation with a friend, and suddenly you can't remember what they just said. Your mind blanks for a moment, and you feel that sinking feeling. Did I completely lose focus? Here's the thing. Moments like these aren't just annoying. They're a window into something really important, your working memory. By the end of this video, you'll do a simple test that shows exactly how strong your working memory is. And more importantly, you'll understand why some people seem effortlessly focused, while others constantly forget even the little things. It's time to find out where you stand. Working memory is like the brain's scratch pad. It's where we temporarily hold and manipulate information to get things done. Whether that's doing mental math, following a conversation, or remembering a phone number long enough to dial it. It's often confused with short-term memory, but there's a key difference. Short-term memory is just storage, holding info briefly. Working memory, on the other hand, is active. It's storage plus processing. You're not just remembering, you're thinking while remembering. Psychologist Alan Badley broke working memory down into 3 main components. First, the phonological loop, which handles verbal information, words, numbers, sounds. Then there's the visuospatial sketchpad, which manages visual and spatial info, like picturing a route on a map. Finally, the central executive is the boss. It decides what to pay attention to, what to ignore, and how to coordinate the other two systems. Understanding this model helps explain why multitasking often fails. If the central executive is overloaded, your phonological loop or visuospatial sketchpad can't keep up. That's why we forget names in a conversation or misplace items around the house. Working memory isn't fixed. It can be trained, challenged, and improved, just like a muscle. I remember the first time I really realized how fragile my working memory could be. I was at a friend's game night, juggling a conversation, keeping score, and trying to remember the rules of a new board game. Somehow, I completely forgot the sequence of turns, and in the middle of the game, I blurted out the wrong score. Everyone laughed, and I felt that familiar sinking feeling, the kind that hits when your brain just blanks. Later, my friend mentioned a simple memory test psychologists use. Out of curiosity, I tried it on my phone. It involved remembering a series of numbers, then letters, then a mix of both. I failed the first round. And the weird part? It wasn't that I was dumb. It was that my working memory had reached its limit, juggling too many small tasks at once. That moment stuck with me. It was eye-opening. Working memory has fascinated psychologists for decades because it's central to how we think, learn, and solve problems. One of the most famous findings comes from George Miller in 1956, who suggested we can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 items in our working memory at a time. That's why remembering a 10-digit phone number without chunking can feel impossible. Cognitive load theory explains why this limit matters. Your brain has a finite capacity for processing information. When you overload it, trying to multitask, remember too many things, or process complex instructions, your working memory struggles and forgetfulness increases. Working memory isn't just about storage, it's also about attention and control. The central executive, part of Baddeley's model, decides what to focus on and what to ignore. This explains why distractions are so costly. Each interruption forces your brain to reorient, reducing effective working memory capacity. Even everyday tasks rely on the system, calculating a tip, following a recipe, or remembering a friend's story mid-conversation. When we understand the science, it becomes clear why some people can juggle multiple mental tasks effortlessly, while others feel mentally drained after just a few. Let's put your working memory to the test right now. Don't worry, this is quick and you can do it anywhere. I want you to remember this sequence of numbers: 7, 2, 9, 4, 6. Say them out loud or write them down if it helps. Got it? Good. Now, I'm going to ask you to reverse them in your mind. That's right. Start with the last number and work backward. 6, 4, 9, 2, 7. How did you do? Next, try this with letters. B, M, F, K, R. Remember them? Then mix them with the numbers you just reversed. Now your brain is juggling multiple streams of information at once. Most people find this surprisingly tricky on the first try, and that's normal. Each shows the limits of working memory and why our brains sometimes fail, even on simple tasks. Psychologists have developed precise ways to measure working memory, beyond the simple tests we just tried. One common method is the digit span task, where participants repeat sequences of numbers forward or backward. Performance here reflects the brain's ability to hold and manipulate information. Another widely used test is the N-back task. In this exercise, you monitor a series of stimuli, numbers, letters, or shapes, and identify when the current item matches one from N steps earlier. This continuously challenges both storage and attention, making it a robust measure of working memory. Then there's the Corsi block test, which uses spatial memory. You watch a sequence of blocks light up on a screen and must replicate the pattern. This taps the visual spatial sketchpad, highlighting the visual component of working memory. It's important to note the difference between recall and recognition. Recall requires actively reconstructing information, which is harder, while recognition is just identifying what you've seen before. Working memory tests often combine both, revealing not just capacity, but control over attention and processing. These methods help psychologists understand why some people can multitask effortlessly, while others struggle even with small mental loads. I remember a friend of mine preparing for a big presentation at work. She had multiple data sets to remember, slides to organize, and a Q&A session looming at the end. Every detail mattered. During rehearsal, she stumbled, forgot a key statistic, mixed up the sequence of slides. The stress was palpable. But then she tried a technique she'd read about, breaking information into chunks and repeating it aloud. By the day of the presentation, something remarkable happened. Despite the pressure, she recalled the numbers accurately, explained complex ideas clearly, and even handled unexpected questions smoothly. That's working memory in action. It's not just about holding information, it's about managing and using it under stress. When your working memory is trained and focused, everyday challenges, from presentations to conversations, become far more manageable. Moments like these show why strengthening working memory isn't just a brain exercise, it's a real-life superpower. The good news? Working memory isn't fixed. Research shows it can be strengthened with targeted strategies. One effective technique is chunking, grouping information into meaningful units. For example, it's easier to remember a phone number as 555-204-9187 rather than 10 separate digits. This reduces cognitive load and frees up mental space. Another powerful tool is dual N-back training. Studies suggest that practicing this task regularly can enhance working memory and improve fluid intelligence. It forces your brain to hold multiple pieces of information while continuously updating them. Mindfulness and meditation also help. By training attention and reducing distractions, mindfulness strengthens the central executive, making it easier to focus on the task at hand. Finally, simple lifestyle choices matter. Adequate sleep, exercise, and minimizing multitasking all support working memory. Even small habits like repeating instructions aloud or visualizing information can make a measurable difference. With consistent practice, your working memory becomes more reliable, letting you juggle mental tasks, stay focused, and remember details effortlessly in daily life. So, how did you do on the working memory tests? Did you breeze through, or did some sequences trip you up? Whatever your score, here's the takeaway. Working memory isn't a fixed trait. It's a skill you can train and strengthen. Think about the everyday moments. Remembering names, following instructions, or juggling tasks at work. Your working memory is quietly guiding every decision, every interaction, every action. Strengthening it isn't just about brain games. It's about improving focus, reducing stress, and performing better in real life. Even small changes, chunking information, practicing memory exercises, reducing distractions, can make a huge difference over time. So, take a moment to reflect. What's one strategy you can try today to challenge your working memory? Remember, your brain is capable of more than you think. And with practice, forgetfulness doesn't have to define your day. Your focus, your memory, your mind, it's all trainable. I remember this moment vividly. I had left my keys on the kitchen counter again and spent a frantic 10 minutes tearing the house apart. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. Forgetting something small feels trivial, but forgetting something important can shake your whole day. It's weird how memory works. Sometimes a name, a date, or even a childhood moment comes back clearly, while other times it's like the memory was never there. Today, I want to take you on a journey into your own mind. We'll explore how strong your long term memory really is. And I've got a free test that will show you exactly where you stand. Let's break it down simply. Long-term memory is the system in your brain that stores information for days, months, or even decades. Unlike short-term memory, which holds a phone number just long enough to dial it, long-term memory is built to last. Psychologists often divide it into three main types. Episodic memory, your personal experiences, like your first day at school. Semantic memory, facts and knowledge, like knowing that Paris is the capital of France. Procedural memory, skills and actions, like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. The classic Atkinson and Shiffrin model explains it as a flow. Information first enters short-term memory, and through processes like repetition, meaningful connections, and emotion, it moves into long-term storage. Long-term memory isn't just a passive vault. It's dynamic, constantly reorganizing and connecting new information with old. That's why remembering something can trigger related memories you didn't even realize you had. Understanding this is the first step in testing and improving your own memory. Forgetting isn't just carelessness, it's a normal part of how your brain works. Psychologists like Hermann Ebbinghaus showed this with the forgetting curve, which reveals that we lose a large portion of new information within the first hours, unless we actively review it. There are two main types of interference that trip up memory. Proactive interference. Old memories block new ones. Think of learning a new phone number, but your old number keeps popping up. Retroactive interference, new information overwrites old memories, like when you move to a new address and keep forgetting your previous one. Retrieval also plays a huge role. Memories don't disappear, they just become harder to access without the right cues. That's why you might suddenly remember a detail when you see a familiar photo or hear a certain song. Even emotions and stress affect recall. High stress floods the brain with cortisol, which can make memories harder to retrieve, while emotional events are often encoded more deeply. Understanding why we forget is crucial before testing your own long-term memory. I'll never forget the day I completely blanked on my best friend's birthday. I had seen the date on the calendar a dozen times, yet somehow, when the day came, it just slipped away. I walked past their house, realized my mistake, and felt that sinking pit in my stomach. It wasn't just the missed celebration, it was the guilt, the embarrassment, the how could I forget spinning in my head. Moments like this are so relatable because we all experience memory lapses, even in important areas of our lives. And here's the thing. It's not just about remembering or forgetting, it's about how your brain stores and retrieves these memories. And that's exactly what we're about to explore. Long-term memory is more than just storage. It's a complex process with three key steps: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is how information enters your brain. Your brain pays attention to meaningful details, emotions, or patterns. That's why you often remember emotionally charged moments more vividly than mundane ones. Once encoded, information moves to storage. The hippocampus acts like a librarian, organizing memories and connecting them with related knowledge. Over time, these memories are consolidated in the prefrontal cortex, making them more stable and easier to retrieve later. Sleep plays a huge role here. During deep sleep, your brain replays and strengthens memories, which is why a good night's rest can make a huge difference in recall. Finally, there's retrieval. bringing memories back into conscious thought. Retrieval is cue dependent. Seeing a photo, hearing a song, or even smelling a familiar scent can trigger vivid recollections. Think of it like filing papers in a cabinet. The better the filing system, organization, repetition, emotional relevance, the faster and more accurately you can pull out what you need. Understanding this process is key before we jump into the free long-term memory test, which will help you see it in action. Now, it's time to see your long-term memory in action. This free test is simple, and you can do it at home without any special tools. The goal isn't to stress you, it's to observe how your brain stores and retrieves information. Step 1. Recall exercise. Think back to a random day last week. Try to list everything you remember. What you ate, who you spoke to, what tasks you completed. Don't judge your memory, just let it flow. Step 2. Recognition exercise. Grab a newspaper or scroll through your favorite news app. Look at 10 headlines for 1 minute, then cover them and try to write down as many as you can recall. This tests your ability to recognize and retain new information. Step 3. Sequencing exercise. Recall a sequence of events, like your morning routine. Can you put actions in the exact order? This tests your procedural and episodic memory. Interpreting your results. If you recalled most details easily, your long-term memory encoding and retrieval are strong. If you struggled, it may indicate weak retrieval cues or interference, not necessarily poor memory. Remember, memory is dynamic, and performance can improve with practice and the right techniques. This test isn't about perfection. It's about awareness, which is the first step to strengthening your memory. Imagine someone who can recite decades-old conversations or remember every book they've read, like a chess grandmaster recalling every game move. That's what strong, long-term memory can look like in real life. It's not just about trivia. It's context, patterns, and connections that stick effortlessly. On the other hand, think of someone who constantly misplaces their keys, forgets appointments, or blanks on names at social gatherings. These lapses aren't failures. They reflect gaps in retrieval or weak encoding, which can be improved. Here's something most people don't notice. Even small improvements in memory change how you experience daily life. Remembering little details strengthens relationships, boosts confidence, and helps you feel more in control. Understanding these real-life contrasts prepares you to apply strategies to enhance your own long-term memory, which we'll dive into next. Improving long-term memory isn't about luck. It's about strategies backed by science. Here's how to strengthen yours. 1. Spaced repetition. Instead of cramming, review information at increasing intervals. Psychology research shows that spacing out practice dramatically improves retention. Apps like Anki use this principle to help you remember anything from languages to facts. 2. Elaboration. Connect new information to something you already know. The more associations you make, the easier it is to encode and retrieve memories. For example, linking a historical event to a personal experience makes it stick. 3. Mnemonics and visualization. Memory champions often use mental imagery and acronyms to remember complex information. Turning abstract data into vivid, story-like images helps your brain store it more effectively. 4. Lifestyle factors. Sleep, exercise, and stress management are critical. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates memories, while exercise boosts neuroplasticity, and lower stress keeps cortisol from interfering with recall. 5. Focus and minimize distractions. Attention residue, the leftover mental energy from previous tasks, can block memory encoding. Focusing on one task at a time ensures your brain fully encodes information into long-term storage. Using these strategies consistently doesn't just improve memory, It reshapes how your brain organizes and retrieves information, making everyday life smoother and more reliable. Memory is tricky. There are a few myths that can mislead us. First, memory isn't a video recorder. You don't store exact copies of events. Instead, your brain reconstructs memories each time you recall them, which means details can shift subtly over time. Second, forgetting isn't always bad. Our brains filter out irrelevant information to prevent overload, which actually helps focus on what matters most. Third, people often believe strong memory means remembering everything perfectly. In reality, it's about retrieval efficiency and organization, not flawless recall. Understanding these misconceptions helps you approach memory with a realistic and effective mindset, which is far more useful than chasing the illusion of perfect recall. I remember the first time I applied what I learned about memory. I tried the exercises, used simple mnemonics, and paid more attention to how I encoded information. A week later, I could recall details I normally would have forgotten, and it felt like a small superpower. Here's the thing. Improving long-term memory isn't about being perfect. It's about awareness, practice, and understanding how your brain works. So, take the free test we went through, notice where you excel and where you struggle. Each insight is a step toward a sharper, more reliable memory. Your memory shapes how you experience life. Treat it well, and it will reward you in ways you never expected. I want you to close your eyes for a second and think about something everyone remembers. Maybe it's a childhood cartoon, a logo, or a famous movie line. Now, imagine realizing that the way you remember it isn't how it actually was. That sinking feeling, when your memory confidently tells you one thing, but the world insists you're wrong, that's exactly what the Mandela Effect is all about. I remember the first time it happened to me. I could swear a certain movie quote went one way. I argued with my friends, convinced I was right. And then I saw it on screen, and my mind completely refused to accept it. It felt like my brain was playing a trick on me. The world I thought I knew suddenly seemed unreliable. Here's the thing. This isn't just a glitch. It's your brain doing exactly what it's built to do. The Mandela Effect is a term psychologists use to describe a collective false memory, when a large group of people remember something that never actually happened. It's named after Nelson Mandela because many people vividly recalled him dying in prison during the 1980s, even though he was released and went on to become president decades later. Other classic examples include the spelling of Berenstain Bears. Most remember it as Berenstein, or the Monopoly Man, whom many recall wearing a monocle, which he never did. What's happening here isn't magic or mind control. Memory isn't like a video recorder. Instead, it's reconstructive. Each time you recall an event, your brain pieces it together from fragments, sometimes filling gaps with assumptions or suggestions. This is why two people can remember the exact same event differently. Our memories feel real, but they are surprisingly malleable. I remember sitting with a friend, arguing about a line from a classic movie. I was sure I had it word for word right. My confidence was unshakable. My friend looked at me, eyebrows raised, and played the scene. Every word I had remembered was wrong. Not a single part matched my memory. For a moment, I questioned myself. Did I imagine it? Was I losing it? That uneasy mix of disbelief and embarrassment sank in deep. Then it hit me. This wasn't about being forgetful. My brain hadn't stored the wrong words. It had constructed them. I had filled in gaps with what felt right, what my mind expected to hear. That's when I realized just how fragile memory can be. Even our most confident recollections can betray us. Memory isn't like a perfect recording of events. It's more like a constantly edited story. Psychologists describe it in three stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is how your brain takes in information. It's influenced by attention, emotion, and context. If something doesn't grab your focus, your brain might encode it weakly or even incorrectly. Once encoded, the memory enters storage, but it isn't stored as a single, unchangeable snapshot. Instead, it's broken into fragments across different brain areas, like sights in the visual cortex or sounds in the auditory cortex. Finally comes retrieval, when you recall the memory. Here's the tricky part. Every time you retrieve it, your brain reconstructs it. It fills gaps using related knowledge, assumptions, or suggestions from others. That's why details can shift over time, even without you realizing it. Elizabeth Loftus's research on eyewitness testimony shows this clearly. People confidently remember events that never happened, simply because of subtle cues or leading questions. In short, memory is adaptive, not perfect. It helps us survive, but it also makes us vulnerable to errors, and that's exactly where false memories come from. Maybe you've experienced this. You remember a childhood cartoon character's name one way, but when you look it up, it's completely different. Or you swear a product logo had a certain design, only to find it never existed. One friend I know was convinced the Fruit of the Loom logo had a cornucopia behind the fruit. They argued about it for weeks, certain they were right. And yet, no historical version of the logo ever included one. I've seen families argue over movie quotes, confident that the lines were exactly how they remembered. Siblings recall birthdays, vacations, even small fights differently. The weirdest part? These memories feel real. People can describe them in vivid detail, complete with emotion and context. That conviction is why false memories are so powerful. They don't just trick your mind, they can shape your identity, your stories, and the way you see the world. False memories happen because of how our brains process and reconstruct information. One key factor is source monitoring errors, confusing where a memory actually came from. You might remember a story you heard from a friend as something you personally experienced. Then there's the misinformation effect, a concept studied extensively by Elizabeth Loftus. Even subtle suggestions or leading questions can alter how we remember an event. For example, hearing, "Did the car smash into the other vehicle?" can create a more intense memory than, "Did the car hit the other vehicle?" Your brain fills in details based on the words used. Social influence also plays a big role. Collective memories can reinforce false recollections. If everyone around you insists that something happened a certain way, your brain may adjust your memory to match theirs, a kind of socially reinforced reconstruction. Cognitive biases like confirmation bias also contribute. We tend to notice and remember details that align with what we already believe, and ignore or forget details that don't. Studies using the Dees-Rodiger-McDermott paradigm show how easy it is to remember words that were never presented, just because they fit the theme of the list. Put together, these mechanisms show that memory isn't just flawed, it's actively malleable. What feels like certainty can be a carefully reconstructed illusion shaped by suggestion, expectation, and social context. I was once in a group discussion about a famous movie line. Everyone confidently repeated it exactly the same way, except me. My memory clashed with theirs completely. We debated, laughed, and even pulled up clips to prove our points. Every single person in the group was sure they were right. And yet, when we checked the actual scene, no one's memory was perfectly accurate, including mine. It was fascinating and unsettling at the same time. Our brains had constructed a shared version of reality, reinforced by discussion and agreement. What felt like a collective truth was, in reality, a carefully reconstructed illusion. That moment stuck with me. It made me realize how easily memories can be influenced and how powerful social reinforcement is in shaping what we think we remember. The Mandela effect feels so real because our brains are wired to make sense of the world, even when memory fails. One reason is familiarity and fluency. If something feels familiar, your brain assumes it's accurate, even if it's not. That's why misspelled logos or altered phrases still feel right in your mind. Hindsight bias also plays a role. Once we think we know the correct version, it's easy to convince ourselves that we always knew it, reinforcing the false memory. Neuroscience adds another layer. The hippocampus stores memories, while the prefrontal cortex helps reconstruct them. Every recall triggers slight rewiring, blending fact with assumption. That's why your memory can change each time you think about it. Social reinforcement amplifies the effect. When multiple people remember the same wrong detail, it creates a feedback loop. Confidence grows and doubt diminishes. In short, the Mandela effect feels convincing because your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do: create coherent, meaningful memories, even if that means bending the truth. Think about the line from Star Wars: "Luke, I am your father." Most people swear they heard it exactly that way, but the actual line is just, "No, I am your father." Then there's Fruit of the Loom. Countless people remember a cornucopia behind the fruit, but it has never existed. Or the children's books, Berenstain Bears. Almost everyone remembers them spelled Berenstein. Even the Monopoly Man confuses people. Many recall him sporting a monocle, yet he never did. What's striking is how confident people are. They can describe these details vividly, defend them passionately, and even feel a pang of disbelief when corrected. It's proof that our memories are convincing illusions, blending reality with expectation, social cues, and imagination. You can't make memory perfect, but you can reduce errors by being aware of how it works. The first step is questioning assumptions. When you recall something confidently, pause and consider, could I be mixing up details or sources? Checking sources is another powerful tool. Look up facts, quotes, or images instead of relying solely on memory. Cross-referencing helps prevent the brain from filling gaps with false information. Journaling your experiences can also help. Writing down events soon after they happen creates a more reliable record for future recall. Finally, be mindful of social influence. Discussing memories with others is natural, but recognize that collective agreement doesn't guarantee accuracy. Awareness is key. Understanding that memory is reconstructive, not flawless, allows you to navigate your own recollections with curiosity instead of shame. Memory is one of the most fascinating parts of being human, but it's also fragile. The Mandela effect reminds us that even the memories we hold most confidently can be flawed, reconstructed, or influenced by others. That doesn't make us unreliable. It makes us human. Our brains are constantly interpreting, predicting, and filling in gaps to create a coherent story of our lives. Sometimes that story bends the truth without us even realizing it. Next time you're certain about a memory, pause and reflect. Explore it, verify it, and share it. But do so knowing that your brain might be telling a story rather than relaying fact. In the end, these errors don't diminish the wonder of memory. They highlight it. The Mandela effect isn't just a quirk. It's a glimpse into how our minds shape reality, one reconstructed memory at a time. I remember flipping through an old notebook and pausing on a page I'd read years ago. Every word, every tiny margin note came rushing back like a photograph. It felt impossible, like my brain had taken a snapshot of that moment in time. Maybe you've heard stories like this. People who can recall every page of a book, every street they've walked, even conversations from decades ago. The idea of a photographic memory is intoxicating. It's in movies, books, even casual conversations. But here's the thing. While it feels magical, science tells a very different story. Most of what we think we know about photographic memory is actually myth, misunderstood science, and our brain's own clever tricks. So what is true? What's exaggeration? And why do we crave the idea that our minds could work like a camera? Let's break it down. When most people hear photographic memory, they imagine someone flipping through a book and recalling every word perfectly. Movies and TV have reinforced this idea for decades. Think of the prodigy who memorizes every page of a textbook or recalls faces with perfect clarity. Pop culture loves it because it feels like a superpower, and honestly, who wouldn't want a mind that works like a camera? It taps into a deep fascination, the idea that we could see something once and never forget it. But psychology paints a different picture. Studies show that while humans can develop extraordinary memory skills, the perfect, effortless recall portrayed in stories is extremely rare. Most so-called photographic memory is actually a combination of practice, focus, and clever techniques, plus a little exaggeration. Our brains trick us into thinking people have superhuman abilities, when in reality, memory has limits. I remember sitting at my desk, determined to memorize an entire chapter of a book in one go. I read, reread, and highlighted every sentence, imagining that if I just concentrated hard enough, it would all stick. By the end of the hour, I could recall a few key points, but the details? They slipped away like sand through my fingers. I felt frustrated, almost defeated, wondering if I just didn't have the right brain for memory. Maybe this sounds familiar. You've tried to remember a phone number, a paragraph, or even someone's exact words, and no matter how hard you focus, it fades. That's the reality most of us face. Memory is powerful, but it has limits. It's a humbling reminder that what we think of as photographic memory is often an illusion. Eidetic memory is often confused with photographic memory, but they're not the same. Psychologists define eidetic memory as the ability to vividly recall images or scenes after only brief exposure, but it's mostly seen in children, not adults. Research shows that a child with eidetic memory can visualize an image for a short period and describe it in detail. But even in these cases, the memory fades quickly. True photographic memory, perfect, lifelong recall of everything, is practically non-existent. One of the most famous studies was by Charles Stromeyer in the 1970s. He tested a few individuals who could recall complex patterns after a single viewing. But these cases were rare, highly specific, and didn't generalize to everyday memory tasks. So when people claim they have a photographic memory, it's usually a mix of strong visual memory, mnemonic techniques, and practice, not a literal snapshot of reality. Our brains have limits. Working memory, the mental space where we hold information temporarily, can only handle about 4 to 7 items at a time. Attention is another bottleneck. If we're distracted, even slightly, details slip away. Cognitive load theory explains this well. When too much information enters our mind at once, it overwhelms processing capacity, making perfect recall impossible. Even adults with exceptional memory can't bypass these limitations. Research consistently shows that true eidetic abilities decline with age. Children may briefly visualize images vividly, but as the brain matures, it relies on abstraction and pattern recognition, rather than literal snapshots. Frameworks like chunking, encoding, and retrieval strategies allow us to remember more efficiently, but they don't create photographic memory. Memory is less about perfect snapshots and more about organizing and linking information. I once read about a student who seemed to memorize entire textbooks effortlessly. Teachers were amazed. Classmates whispered about his photographic memory. But as the story unfolded, it wasn't magic. He used color-coded notes, diagrams, and repetition, techniques that made his recall appear superhuman. Yet even he admitted he couldn't remember everything perfectly. Some details faded, and he had to review regularly. What struck me most was the emotional impact. People around him treated him like a prodigy, assuming he had an innate gift. The admiration, curiosity, and envy all fed the myth. It's easy to be mesmerized by someone who seems to remember everything, but what looks like a perfect memory is almost always a mix of skill, strategy, and dedication, not a literal photographic snapshot. Many people who seem to have photographic memory are actually using clever strategies. Mnemonic devices, memory palaces, and spaced repetition can make recall astonishingly accurate, but they're skills, not innate superpowers. For example, the memory palace technique links information to imagined locations. When practiced, it allows someone to walk through a mental space and retrieve details. It can feel like seeing a photograph in the mind, but it's really structured recall. Other techniques like dual coding and elaborative rehearsal leverage both visual and verbal systems to strengthen memory. With enough practice, these methods create the illusion of photographic memory. Psychology shows that our brains are excellent pattern detectors. When combined with strategy, practice, and focus, we can remember far more than we initially thought. But it's still grounded in effort and method, not magic. Humans are naturally drawn to stories of superhuman abilities. Cognitive biases like the availability heuristic make dramatic examples like someone recalling every page of a book feel common and believable. Confirmation bias also plays a role. When we hear about photographic memory, we notice and remember the stories that support it, while ignoring countless cases where memory fails. Psychologists suggest that fascination with perfect memory reflects a deeper desire: control over our minds. Memory is messy, selective, and fallible. Myths like photographic memory let us imagine a version of ourselves that never forgets, that never fails. Understanding why these myths persist help us separate wonder from reality. Our brains love them because they tap into hope, awe, and the fantasy of a mind that works like a flawless machine. I remember sitting down after weeks of trying to memorize a long presentation. At first, I thought I just lacked a photographic brain, but then I noticed something. With each repetition, each visualization, each connection I made, recall became easier. It wasn't magic, it was skill. My memory improved because I practiced the right techniques, focused my attention, and gave my brain time to consolidate information. That moment hit me. Memory isn't about innate superpowers, it's about understanding how your brain works and working with it, not against it. And here's the reassuring part. Anyone can get better at remembering, just not by snapping a mental photo. You don't need a mythical photographic memory to remember more effectively. Science shows that simple, consistent habits can dramatically improve recall. Spaced repetition is one of the most powerful techniques. Reviewing information at increasing intervals strengthens neural connections, making recall easier over time. Sleep is another critical factor. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates memories, transferring them from short-term to long-term storage. Without enough rest, even the most focused study sessions are less effective. Other strategies include minimizing distractions, using attention cues, and connecting new information to existing knowledge. Techniques like chunking or creating vivid mental images make details easier to retrieve. Memory isn't about perfect snapshots. It's about building a brain that stores and retrieves efficiently, one strategy at a time. Photographic memory feels magical, almost like a superpower. But the truth is more human and fascinating. Our brains are incredible, capable of extraordinary recall when we understand how memory works. What seems like a photographic ability is usually skill, strategy, and dedication, not a literal snapshot. And that's the beauty of it. Memory isn't about being born perfect. It's about learning, practicing, and paying attention. So the next time you hear someone claim they have photographic memory, remember this. Your mind doesn't need a magic lens to be remarkable. With focus, techniques, and patience, your memory can surprise you in ways that feel just as powerful, maybe even more so. I remember this one evening, staring blankly at a page of names I was supposed to remember for a meeting. I repeated them over and over. But the moment I looked away, they were gone. It felt like my brain had betrayed me, and I could almost hear it whisper, "Not today." Maybe this sounds familiar to you. Walking into a room and forgetting why you came, struggling to recall a simple list, or even freezing when someone asks for your friend's birthday. That frustration, that tiny pinch of self-doubt, it sticks with you. But here's the thing. Remembering doesn't have to be a struggle. There are tricks, psychology-backed hacks that can turn your forgetful moments into supercharged recall. By the end of this video, you'll have simple, actionable memory tools that actually work. You'll start to notice your brain holding on to information in ways you never thought possible. Our brains weren't designed to remember everything. Working memory, the mental sticky note we use for short-term information, is extremely limited. George Miller's classic research suggests we can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 items at once. That's why trying to remember a 20-item grocery list without help feels impossible. Cognitive load plays a big role too. When our brains are juggling too many things, decisions, distractions, emotions, it struggles to encode new information. This is why multitasking often leaves us forgetting what we just read or heard. Long-term memory isn't much kinder if we don't encode information effectively. Without strong associations or repeated exposure, details fade. This is where mnemonics come in. They act as bridges, turning short-term overload into memorable, retrievable long-term knowledge. Essentially, they work with the brain, not against it, giving your memory the structure it naturally craves. I'll never forget the first time a memory trick actually worked for me. I was in high school, struggling to remember the order of operations in math, PEMDAS. I tried repeating it over and over, but it just didn't stick. Then a friend taught me a simple phrase. "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." Suddenly, the letters weren't just random. They had a story, a rhythm, a life of their own. I could recall them effortlessly, even under pressure during tests. That moment felt almost magical. I realized my brain wasn't broken. It just needed the right kind of cues. From frustration to excitement, I discovered that memory isn't about raw effort. It's about smart strategies. That one small trick opened my eyes to a whole world of memory hacks, and I've been exploring them ever since. Mnemonics are more than clever tricks. They're grounded in psychology. At their core, they work by creating strong associations, making information easier to encode and retrieve from long-term memory. There are several types you can use. Acronyms and acrostics turn a list into a simple word or sentence, like PEMDAS. Chunking breaks down complex information into manageable pieces, which reduces cognitive load and leverages our 7 plus or minus 2 working memory limit. Rhymes and songs exploit rhythm and melody, tapping into auditory memory. And the method of loci, or memory palace, uses spatial visualization to place information along familiar locations, making it easier to recall. Why do these work so well? Well, research shows that dual coding, combining verbal and visual cues, enhances memory retention. When you link something new to existing knowledge or a vivid mental image, your brain has multiple pathways to retrieve it. In essence, mnemonics transform abstract information into something concrete, structured, and emotionally engaging, which is exactly what your memory thrives on. I remember standing in my kitchen with a mental blank. I had a grocery list: milk, apples, bread, and eggs. Normally, I'd panic and start scribbling, but this time I decided to try a memory trick. I created a silly little story in my head. The milk was swimming in a pool of apples, while the bread was sunbathing on the edge, and the eggs were juggling themselves in the air. The image was ridiculous, but that's exactly why it worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it clearly. By the time I walked into the store, I remembered everything effortlessly. No notes, no phone reminders, just a mental story that my brain couldn't forget. That day, I realized memory isn't about repetition alone. It's about making information vivid, emotional, and connected. Suddenly, grocery shopping felt like a fun mental exercise instead of a chore. Creating your own mnemonics is simpler than most people think. The first step is identifying the key information you want to remember. Is it a list, a sequence, or a set of concepts? Once you know the target, you can choose the right mnemonic style. Step 2, transform the information. Acronyms work well for sequences. Take the first letters and form a word or a phrase. Rhymes and songs are great for facts you need to recall in order. Chunking helps when the list is long, breaking it into smaller, manageable groups. And for complex or abstract material, the method of loci, or memory palace, lets you visualize each item along a familiar path. Step 3, make it vivid and emotional. Silly, unusual, or exaggerated images stick far better than neutral ones. Imagine a purple elephant juggling apples rather than just a plain apple. Your brain remembers the story, not the mundane item. Finally, practice retrieval. Test yourself repeatedly. The more you actively recall, the stronger the neural pathways become. With these steps, your memory goes from passive to actively engaged, turning tricky information into something unforgettable. I remember walking into a crowded party, instantly overwhelmed by a sea of faces. People were introducing themselves, and I could feel my mind going blank. Names slipped away the moment they were spoken. Then I tried something different. I pictured each person with a visual cue: a friend named Lily holding a giant lily flower, or Mark balancing a stack of marks on his head. As I repeated the association in my mind, the names started sticking. I even added a little interaction to the image: Lily waving, Mark tripping over a stack of marks. By the end of the night, I could recall almost every name effortlessly. I felt like unlocking a secret superpower. More than that, it changed how I interacted. Remembering names made conversations smoother, deeper, and more genuine. That night, I realized memory tricks aren't just about facts. They're about connection, presence, and confidence. The memory palace, or method of loci, is one of the most powerful mnemonic techniques. It works by placing information along a familiar spatial path, like rooms in your house or landmarks on your route to work. Each item becomes a vivid mental image tied to a specific location. Later, when you walk through that space in your mind, the items naturally come back to you. Studies, like McGuire et al. 2003, show that expert memory users, such as London taxi drivers, have significantly enlarged hippocampi, the brain region responsible for spatial memory, demonstrating how visualization and spatial encoding enhance recall. Chunking is equally effective, especially for complex information. Instead of remembering 20 separate items, group them into meaningful clusters. For example, a phone number is easier to recall as 555-321-789 than as a string of 10 digits. Chunking reduces cognitive load and allows working memory to handle more information efficiently. Combined, these techniques leverage both spatial and organizational memory, turning overwhelming data into manageable, retrievable units. With consistent practice, even seemingly impossible lists, sequences, or abstract facts become easy to remember. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at a pile of notes the night before a big exam. Normally, I'd panic, cramming blindly and hoping something would stick. But this time, I decided to try what I'd learned about mnemonics. I created acronyms for lists, chunked complex concepts into smaller groups, and even built a tiny memory palace in my mind for the dates and formulas I needed. Each time I rehearsed, the information felt alive, connected, and surprisingly easy to recall. The next day, walking into the exam, I felt calm. When the questions appeared, the answers came naturally. I didn't just remember them, I visualized the cues I'd practiced, and it all clicked. That moment taught me the real power of mnemonics. They don't just help you memorize, they give you confidence, turn anxiety into control, and make learning feel almost effortless. Building a strong memory isn't about cramming, it's about daily, consistent practice. Start small. Pick one mnemonic technique each day and apply it to something simple like a grocery list or a set of names. Use spaced repetition to reinforce what you learn. Revisiting information at increasing intervals strengthens neural connections and moves memories from short-term to long-term storage. Pair this with active recall, testing yourself instead of just reviewing, because retrieving information is far more effective than passive reading. Incorporate mnemonics into your routine naturally. Turn facts into short rhymes, silly images, or tiny stories. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day of deliberate practice can compound into significant improvements over time. Remember, your brain thrives on connection and meaning. The more you make information vivid, emotional, or structured, the easier it becomes to remember. Consistency and creativity are the real keys to mastering memory hacks. I think back to that awkward high school student who couldn't remember names or lists. Fast forward, and using mnemonics turned those moments of frustration into effortless recall. Each trick I learned became a tiny superpower, small, practical, and surprisingly fun. The takeaway is simple. Memory isn't fixed. With the right strategies, acronyms, rhymes, chunking, and memory palaces, you can hack your brain and remember more than you ever thought possible. Start small. Pick one technique today and watch your confidence grow. Your memory is waiting for you to unlock it. I remember standing in my kitchen last week, staring at the fridge, completely blank. I knew I had come for something, but what was it? Maybe you felt this too, walking into a room, forgetting a name, or misplacing your keys. Here's the thing. Our brains are amazing, but they weren't designed to remember every detail perfectly. That's where a mind palace comes in, a simple yet powerful trick that can transform the way you store and recall information. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you 5 easy steps to build your own memory palace so you can finally remember things without panic or frustration. Before we dive into building your mind palace, it helps to understand why we forget in the first place. Our brain handles information through short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory is like a small sticky note. It can only hold a few things at once. Long-term memory is more like a massive filing cabinet, but only if information is stored correctly. One reason we forget is cognitive load. Our brains get overwhelmed when we try to juggle too much at once. Think about trying to remember a grocery list while texting and listening to a podcast. Our attention is split and nothing sticks. Research also shows that without strong associations or meaningful connections, information in our long-term memory becomes hard to retrieve. That's exactly what the memory palace method fixes. It gives your brain a structured, spatial, and emotional framework to anchor memories so they're easy to recall later. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture your childhood home, or maybe your favorite cafe. Walk through it in your mind, noticing the walls, the furniture, the little quirks that make it yours. This is the place you'll turn into your first mind palace. The more familiar and vivid it feels, the easier it will be to store memories there. Maybe it's the cozy corner of your bedroom where sunlight hits in the morning, or the staircase that creaks just so. I remember my first palace. It was my old apartment. Every corner, every lamp, every chair became a checkpoint for remembering things. It wasn't just about memorizing. It was about feeling the space, letting my mind walk through it, like I was already living there again. Choosing your palace is the foundation of the memory palace technique, also called the loci method. The core idea is simple. Our brains are naturally good at remembering spatial environments. By associating information with specific locations, we create mental hooks for memory. Neuroscience shows that the hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, is highly active when navigating spaces, real or imagined. That's why walking through a familiar place in your mind makes recalling information so much easier. When picking your palace, it should be highly familiar. A childhood home, a daily commute, or even a favorite park works. The key is consistency. The more vividly you can picture it, the stronger the memory anchors. Once you've chosen your palace, you're ready to add landmarks, which act as stations where memories will live. Think of it as mapping out a treasure trail where each stop holds a piece of information you want to remember. As you walk through your palace, in your mind, start noticing distinct spots. A doorway, a bookshelf, a windowsill. These aren't just background details. These are your memory landmarks. I remember turning my old apartment into a palace. The squeaky stairs became my first checkpoint, the worn-out sofa my second, and the kitchen table my third. Each landmark was a mental anchor where I could place a memory. The trick is to choose landmarks that stand out and are easy to visualize. Don't clutter your palace with every object. Pick the ones that are memorable. These landmarks will act like stops on a map. Later, when you walk through your palace, your mind will naturally flow from one landmark to the next, triggering the memories you've stored there effortlessly. Defining clear landmarks is more than just picking objects. It's about creating retrieval anchors for your memory. In psychology, this ties into the concept of chunking, where we break information into manageable, meaningful units. Each landmark becomes a chunk that holds specific information. Another principle at work is encoding specificity. Memories are easier to recall when the context during encoding matches the context during retrieval. By linking information to distinct landmarks, Your brain can use these visual spatial cues to trigger recall. Landmarks should be specific, vivid, and ordered. For example, a window with a red curtain is more memorable than a plain wall. The order matters too. Your mind will naturally travel in sequence, creating a structured path for recalling information. By carefully defining your landmarks, you're turning abstract facts into concrete mental waypoints, making recall faster, smoother, and more reliable. Now comes the fun part, turning your landmarks into memory machines. Instead of just imagining a chair or a door, you transform them into vivid, exaggerated images that stick in your mind. I remember trying to memorize a shopping list. The first item, eggs, became a giant dancing egg cracking jokes on my sofa. Bananas? They were sliding down my stairs like tiny yellow water slides. Ugh, it felt ridiculous, but that's the point. Humor, exaggeration, and emotion make your images unforgettable. The sillier or more emotional the visualization, the more your brain lights up when recalling it. By placing strong, memorable images at each landmark, your mind starts building a palace that's not just a place, it's an experience you can walk through and interact with. Placing vivid images in your memory palace works because of dual coding theory. This psychological principle states that information is easier to remember when it's encoded both visually and verbally. By turning abstract facts into strong mental images, you create multiple pathways for retrieval. Emotion also plays a key role. Studies show that the amygdala, which processes emotion, enhances memory consolidation. That's why a funny, shocking, or exaggerated image sticks far better than a dull one. When creating images, focus on uniqueness, movement, and emotional impact. For example, a static pencil is forgettable, but a pencil bouncing on a trampoline while wearing a hat becomes impossible to ignore. By combining landmarks plus vivid images, you're leveraging your brain's natural strengths, spatial navigation, visual memory, and emotional encoding to make recall almost effortless. This is the heart of a memory palace, turning abstract facts into an immersive, memorable experience. Once your images are in place, the next step is to connect them in a logical or story-like sequence. Think of it as creating a mental journey through your palace. I remember memorizing a list of random facts for a presentation. Each landmark had a character or object, and I linked them in a little story. The dancing egg rolled into the banana slide, which then bumped into a talking lamp. It sounded silly, but my brain never forgot it. Linking items like this transforms isolated images into a cohesive narrative, making retrieval smoother. Your mind doesn't have to search aimlessly. It walks naturally from one landmark to the next, following the story you've created. This storytelling approach turns memorization into something engaging and memorable, instead of dull repetition. Linking information is grounded in the psychology of associative memory. Our brains naturally remember things better when they are connected rather than isolated. By creating chains of associations between your images and landmarks, you strengthen the pathways for recall. This is similar to the concept of elaborative encoding, where we attach meaning or relationships to information. Instead of rote memorization, your brain builds a network of connections, which makes retrieval faster and more reliable. Another principle at work is the hippocampus's role in sequence memory. When items are linked in order, your brain can reconstruct the sequence like replaying a mental map. By combining landmarks, vivid images, and logical links, your memory palace becomes more than just a collection of facts. It becomes a dynamic mental journey where each stop cues the next, making even complex information easy to recall. Building your memory palace is just the start. The real power comes from walking through it regularly. I remember the first time I tried to recall all the items in my palace. It felt like stepping into a familiar movie set and seeing every character exactly where I left them. At first, some images stumbled, some sequences blurred, but with repeated mental walkthroughs, everything became crisp. Each practice session strengthened the connections between landmarks and images, making recall almost automatic. This step is where the palace truly becomes yours. The more you revisit it, the more confident and effortless memory retrieval becomes. Soon, remembering long lists, speeches, or important facts feels natural, almost like revisiting a cherished place in your mind. The final step, practice and review, is critical because of spaced repetition and retrieval practice, two of the most robust principles in memory science. Spaced repetition means revisiting your memory palace at increasing intervals, which strengthens long-term retention. Retrieval practice involves actively recalling the information rather than passively reviewing it. Each time you mentally walk through your palace and retrieve an image or fact, you reinforce the neural connections that store that memory. Research also shows that overlearning, practicing even after you think you've memorized, creates more durable memories. The hippocampus consolidates these memories during mental walkthroughs and even during sleep, making recall smoother and faster. By combining consistent practice with your vivid images and structured landmarks, your mind palace becomes a reliable mental library, ready to recall information whenever you need it. Building your first mind palace might feel a little strange at first, but that's normal. I remember the excitement the first time I recalled an entire list perfectly. It was like unlocking a hidden superpower I never knew I had. The truth is, your brain loves structure, vivid images, and emotional connections. By choosing a familiar palace, defining clear landmarks, placing memorable images, linking them, and practicing regularly, you've created a system that turns forgetfulness into confidence. So today, pick your palace, start small, and walk through it. Each step you take strengthens your memory, sharpens your focus, and proves that remembering things isn't just possible, it can even be fun. Your first mind palace is waiting. Are you ready to step inside? I remember sitting at my desk, staring at a mountain of notes, tabs open on my laptop, my phone buzzing nonstop. Every time I tried to focus, another thought popped into my head. Did I reply to that email? What was that formula again? Oh no, I'm late for my meeting. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. That sense of your brain being stretched too thin, like it's juggling 10 balls at once but keeping dropping them. You know the feeling. You're trying to think clearly, but everything feels fuzzy, overwhelming, and exhausting. What if I told you there's a reason your brain feels like this? A real, science-backed explanation for why even simple tasks can leave you mentally drained. It's called cognitive load, and understanding it could change the way you learn, work, and even think. Cognitive load theory was introduced by John Sweller in 1988, and it's all about understanding the limits of your working memory. Simply put, your brain can only hold a small amount of information at one time before it starts to feel overloaded. There are three types of cognitive load. First, intrinsic load. This is the inherent difficulty of the task itself. Learning a simple recipe? Low intrinsic load. Solving a calculus problem? High intrinsic load. Second, extraneous load, the unnecessary mental effort caused by poor presentation of information. Think of instructions that are cluttered, confusing slides, or endless pop-ups on a website. Finally, germane load, the mental effort that actually helps you learn. This is the good load, the part that builds understanding and skills. For example, imagine trying to learn a new language. Memorizing random vocabulary lists in a messy notebook adds extraneous load. Using spaced repetition and meaningful examples adds germane load. Recognizing the difference can help you focus your energy on the right kind of mental effort instead of exhausting yourself on distractions. Understanding these types is the first step to mastering how your brain handles information and stopping that constant mental overwhelm. I remember this one afternoon during exam season. My desk was buried in notes, textbooks stacked like towers, and my brain felt like a scrambled hard drive. I opened my notebook to revise, and nothing. Not a single formula or concept would stick. I kept rereading the same paragraph, but it was like my mind was a foggy glass. Everything blurred together. I slammed my pen down, frustrated, thinking, am I just bad at this? The more I stressed, the less I could remember. My coffee cup sat empty, my phone buzzed endlessly, and my brain felt overloaded in a way that made even simple recall impossible. Maybe you've been there too. Sitting in front of your work, trying your best, and still feeling like your brain is failing you. That's the exact moment I realized this wasn't laziness or lack of effort. My brain was overwhelmed, and it wasn't my fault. Our brains aren't built to hold everything at once. Working memory, the mental workspace where we process new information, has a very limited capacity. Miller's classic research in 1956 suggested we can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information at a time. Beyond that, things start falling through the cracks. Then there's attention residue, a concept from cognitive psychology. When you switch tasks, your focus from the previous task lingers, leaving less mental energy for the new one. That's why multitasking often makes you feel exhausted, even if each task on its own seems simple. Cognitive overload also links to decision fatigue. Every choice you make consumes mental resources, and after too many decisions, your brain struggles to make even small, everyday choices effectively. Put together, these factors explain why your brain can feel like it's maxed out when studying, working, or even scrolling through too many tabs online. Understanding these limits isn't just interesting, it's empowering. You can structure your tasks and learning in a way that respects your brain's natural capacity. Cognitive load isn't just a theory. It shows up everywhere in daily life. Take studying for exams. Dumping a huge chapter into your brain in one sitting creates high intrinsic load. Add messy notes, confusing diagrams, or constant notifications, and extraneous load spikes. Your working memory gets overwhelmed and learning slows down instead of speeding up. Or think about starting a new job. You're trying to remember passwords, workflows, names, and processes all at once. If training materials are poorly organized, your extraneous load skyrockets, leaving you exhausted by the end of the day. Even learning new software is a classic example. A cluttered interface, unclear instructions, and irrelevant features make it hard to focus on what matters. But if the interface is clean and instructions are scaffolded step by step, your brain can devote more energy to understanding, your germane load. The key is noticing when your mental energy is being wasted on irrelevant details versus productive effort. Recognizing these real-life examples helps you see why cognitive overload happens and, more importantly, how to prevent it. I still remember my first big presentation at work. I had rehearsed, prepared slides, and thought I was ready. But the moment I started speaking, my mind went blank. I stumbled over words, forgot key points, and felt all eyes on me. My heart raced, and the more I panicked, the less I could remember. Looking back, I realized my brain was overloaded. I had crammed too much information onto my slides, tried to memorize every detail, and ignored how my working memory actually works. The extraneous load, the cluttered visuals, and endless talking points had hijacked my ability to focus. That day, I felt embarrassed and frustrated, but it taught me an important lesson. No matter how much you know, if your brain is overloaded, it won't function at its best. Learning to manage cognitive load isn't just about studying, it's about performing under pressure, too. Reducing cognitive load starts with chunking information. Instead of trying to remember a long list of facts, group them into meaningful chunks. Your brain can handle these more easily, boosting recall and understanding. Another strategy is scaffolding, building knowledge step by step. Start with the basics, then layer in complexity. This reduces intrinsic load because your brain isn't trying to process everything at once. Minimizing extraneous load is equally important. Clear instructions, clean visuals, and a distraction-free environment help your working memory focus on what actually matters. Even something as simple as closing extra browser tabs or silencing notifications can make a big difference. Using worked examples is also powerful. Seeing a problem solved step by step reduces mental effort and teaches problem-solving patterns. Over time, this strengthens germane load, the good load that helps you learn. The takeaway? Cognitive load isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter. By designing your environment, tasks, and learning strategies with your brain's limits in mind, you can drastically improve focus, retention, and performance. Our brains weren't designed for constant information overload. Evolutionarily, we needed to focus on immediate threats and essential tasks, not process dozens of notifications, emails, and instructions at once. That's why working memory is limited. It's a survival feature, not a flaw. Cognitive bottlenecks mean there's only so much mental information we can juggle at once. When you exceed that, errors creep in, recall fails, and stress rises. Add decision fatigue. Every choice, no matter how small, consumes cognitive resources. And it's easy to see why your brain feels drained by the end of a busy day. The good news is that understanding these limits reframes the problem. Your brain isn't broken or lazy, it's operating exactly as it was designed. Recognizing this allows you to structure tasks, learning, and workflows in ways that align with your mental architecture.
I'll never forget the first time it truly clicked. I was preparing for a big project, but this time I approached it differently. I broke the work into small, manageable chunks, organized my notes clearly, and turned off every distraction I could. As I went through the tasks, something remarkable happened. My brain felt calm. I could focus on one step at a time, and the information actually stuck. Concepts that used to blur together became clear. I realized that I wasn't working harder, I was working smarter. It was like a weight lifted. The sense of overwhelm vanished, replaced by clarity and confidence. I felt in control of my mental energy for the first time in months. That day, I truly understood cognitive load, not just as a theory, but as a tool I could use to learn, perform, and even enjoy challenging tasks. Here's how to put cognitive load theory into practice today. First, chunk your information. Break tasks into small, manageable pieces. Don't overload your brain with everything at once. Second, minimize distractions. Silence notifications, close unnecessary tabs, and create a clean workspace to reduce extraneous load. Third, use scaffolding and worked examples. Start with the basics, then gradually add complexity. Watch someone solve a problem before trying it yourself. It reduces unnecessary mental effort and strengthens learning. Fourth, prioritize germane load. Focus on mental effort that actually builds understanding, not on memorizing irrelevant details. Finally, respect your working memory limits.
Take breaks, avoid multitasking, and be mindful of decision fatigue. By designing your learning, work, and daily routines around these principles, you can dramatically improve focus, retention, and performance without burning out. Cognitive load isn't your enemy. It's a roadmap to smarter thinking and learning. I want you to imagine this for a moment. You're sitting at your desk, heart racing, thought spinning. You know you're upset, but you can't quite put your finger on why. Maybe it's frustration, maybe disappointment, maybe something you don't even have a word for yet. This is something most of us have felt. Stuck in that messy, swirling cloud of emotions, unsure which way to turn. And here's the thing. When emotions feel chaotic, they control you instead of the other way around. I remember one evening, after a long day, I snapped at someone I cared about. Instantly, regret hit me, but I didn't know what triggered it. I just felt overwhelmed. That's when I discovered something that changed everything. The emotion wheel. It's like having a map for your feelings, a tool to name what's happening inside before it spirals out of control. So, what exactly is the emotion wheel? At its core, it's a simple but powerful model that helps you identify and label your emotions. The version most psychologists use today is based on Robert Plutchik's work, which organizes emotions like a color wheel, but for feelings. The wheel is layered. At the center, you have primary emotions, things like joy, sadness, anger, fear, trust, disgust, surprise, and anticipation. These are the building blocks of every feeling we experience. Around them, you'll find secondary or nuanced emotions, which are blends of the primary ones. For example, joy mixed with anticipation becomes optimism, while fear mixed with surprise becomes alarm. Think of the emotion wheel like a map for your inner world. When you can pinpoint exactly what you're feeling, you gain clarity and control. Instead of saying, I feel bad, you can recognize, I feel frustrated and a little anxious, which is a huge difference in how you respond. Using this tool regularly strengthens something psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to differentiate and understand your emotions in detail. And that, in turn, leads to better decision-making, improved communication, and even reduced stress. I remember a time when I felt completely out of control, emotionally. It was a Thursday afternoon, and a small comment from a colleague triggered a wave of irritation I couldn't shake. My chest felt tight, my mind raced, and I kept asking myself, why am I so upset? I tried to push the feeling away, thinking it would pass, but it didn't. Hours later, I found myself snapping at a friend over something trivial. The regret hit instantly when I still didn't understand what had caused the storm in the first place. Maybe this sounds familiar to you, those moments when emotions feel like a tidal wave and you have no map to navigate them. You know you're feeling something intense, but you can't name it, and naming it seems impossible. This is exactly the moment the emotion wheel becomes a lifeline. It helps turn that foggy, overwhelming emotional storm into something you can actually understand and respond to. Here's where the emotion wheel really starts to make sense. Imagine it as a layered circle of feelings. At the very center are your core, primary emotions, the ones we talked about: joy, sadness, anger, fear, trust, disgust, surprise, and anticipation. These are universal. Everyone experiences them. The next layer outwards shows secondary emotions, which are blends or intensifications of the core ones. For instance, combining sadness and disgust can give you remorse, while anger and anticipation might create aggressiveness. Each section of the wheel shows how emotions interact, letting you see subtle differences between what might feel like the same thing on the surface. Using the wheel is simple. Start by asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? Then look at the wheel and find the closest primary emotion. From there, explore the surrounding shades to pinpoint the exact nuance. Psychology research calls this emotional granularity, the ability to recognize and label emotions with precision. People with high emotional granularity handle stress better, communicate more clearly, and make smarter decisions because they know exactly what they're feeling and why. I remember one morning when I woke up feeling off. My mind was buzzing with tension, but I couldn't figure out why. Instead of ignoring it, I grabbed a printed emotion wheel and started circling what resonated. I realized I wasn't just stressed, I was anxious mixed with anticipation. Suddenly, it clicked. My big presentation later that day was triggering both excitement and fear. Just naming it changed everything. I could approach the day calmly, preparing strategically instead of spiraling. It was a small moment, but it made me see the power of clarity. That simple act of mapping my feelings gave me control I hadn't had before. And it's a skill anyone can practice. Your emotions are not enemies, they're signals waiting for you to understand them. Emotional awareness isn't just a feel good concept, it's a psychology backed skill with real benefits. Daniel Goleman, the pioneer of emotional intelligence, EQ, explains that recognizing and labeling emotions is the first step in managing them effectively. When you can name what you're feeling, you reduce the emotional intensity and gain clarity. Research in affect labeling shows this clearly. Simply identifying your emotions, saying, I feel frustrated instead of I feel bad, activates parts of the brain that regulate stress and reduce amygdala overreaction. In other words, naming emotions literally calms your brain. Emotional awareness also improves decision making. When emotions are vague or unnamed, they influence choices unconsciously, often leading to impulsive reactions. High emotional granularity, being precise with your feelings, lets you respond rather than react, communicate more effectively, and navigate conflict with clarity. The emotion wheel is a practical tool for developing this skill. By mapping your feelings, you strengthen emotional intelligence, improve mental resilience, and gain insight into yourself and others, all in a structured, repeatable way. Even with a tool as simple as the emotion wheel, people often stumble. One common mistake is overcomplicating emotions, trying to analyze every little nuance at once. This can create confusion instead of clarity. Another pitfall is skipping subtle feelings. People often stick to broad categories like angry or sad, missing the smaller, more precise emotions that provide real insight. Psychology calls this low emotional granularity, and it limits self awareness. A third mistake is inconsistency. Using the wheel once in a while won't build the habit of reflection. Emotions are constantly changing, so regular check ins are essential. Finally, some forget that the wheel is a tool, not a rule book. It's meant to guide your understanding, not to box your feelings into rigid categories. Approached correctly, it's a map. Used incorrectly, it can feel like a puzzle you can't solve. I want to tell you about a friend who had constant tension with her partner. Every conversation seemed to spark arguments, and she often felt misunderstood. One evening, she decided to try the emotion wheel. During a disagreement, instead of reacting immediately, she silently mapped her feelings. Frustration blended with disappointment. Recognizing this, she paused and chose her words carefully. She explained, I feel frustrated and a little disappointed because I want to be heard instead of lashing out. The result? Her partner listened. The conversation shifted from conflict to understanding. She told me later, I finally felt seen, not just by him, but by myself. This is the power of the wheel. Simply naming your emotions transforms how you respond, turning potential conflict into connection and insight. Using the emotion wheel effectively is all about making it a habit. One of the simplest ways is journaling. Each morning or evening, take a few minutes to map your emotions. Start with the primary feeling, then explore the nuanced layers surrounding it. Another tip is mindful check-ins. Pause during stressful moments and ask, what exactly am I feeling right now? Even a quick glance at the wheel can prevent emotional spirals. Psychology shows that pairing new behaviors with existing habits, known as the habit loop, makes them stick. For example, checking the wheel after your morning coffee or before your daily stand-up creates a routine. You can also combine it with emotion regulation strategies, deep breathing, reframing thoughts, or planning action steps based on your emotions. Over time, these practices increase emotional granularity, reduce stress, and improve relationships. I remember a colleague who started using the emotion wheel for just 5 minutes each morning. At first, it felt trivial, just circling feelings and jotting a note. But within a week, she noticed something surprising. Small moments no longer triggered big reactions. One afternoon, a client gave unexpected criticism. In the past, she would have panicked or snapped. This time, she quickly identified her feelings. Surprise mixed with slight frustration. That tiny act of naming allowed her to respond calmly, ask clarifying questions, and even find a solution collaboratively. She told me, it's crazy how a few minutes of reflection changed my entire day. That's the beauty of the emotion wheel. It's not about overhauling your life instantly. It's about small, consistent shifts that create lasting emotional clarity. Here's the bottom line. Emotions are not confusing or chaotic, they're signals. The emotion wheel is your map to understand them, giving you clarity, control, and insight. By identifying your core feelings and exploring nuanced emotions, you strengthen emotional granularity, a skill linked to better decision-making, reduced stress, and improved communication. Regular use through journaling, mindful check-ins, or quick daily scans turns emotional awareness into a habit. Remember, the wheel isn't a rule book, it's a tool. Use it to pause, reflect, and respond instead of reacting. Even small, consistent moments of mapping your emotions create profound changes over time. So start today. Pinpoint what you feel, explore the layers, and see how it transforms your relationships, your mindset, and how you navigate life's ups and downs. Your emotions are a map. Learn to read them. I remember the first time I was asked to draw a house, a tree, and a person. I was about 8 years old, sitting at a tiny desk, colored pencils in hand, feeling a mix of curiosity and nerves. Maybe this sounds familiar. You draw something simple, thinking it's just a fun activity, but someone tells you it can reveal something deeper about you. Suddenly, a blank piece of paper feels like a mirror to your mind. I didn't know it then, but psychologists have been using this exact exercise for decades to peek into our personalities without us even realizing it. And the insights? Sometimes surprisingly accurate, sometimes unexpected, and always fascinating. The House Tree Person Test, or HTP, is a projective personality assessment. It was first developed by John Buck in 1948 as a way for psychologists to explore a person's inner world through their drawings. The idea is simple. When you draw, your unconscious thoughts, feelings, and conflicts can slip onto the page. Reassuring tone, unlike questionnaires, there are no right or wrong answers, just what comes naturally to you. Psychologists look at your drawings to understand emotional functioning, self-image, and social attitudes. For example, how you draw a house can hint at your sense of security. A tree can reflect personal growth, and a person can reveal self-esteem or relational patterns. HTP is used in clinical, educational, and research settings, often alongside other tools, because it can uncover subtle patterns that standard tests might miss. The HTP test is surprisingly straightforward. You're asked to draw a house, a tree, and a person, usually on separate sheets of paper, using pencils or crayons. Psychologists don't just look at what you draw, they analyze how you draw it. Details like size, placement, level of detail, omissions, and even line pressure can reveal unconscious patterns. For the house, they might notice whether it feels cozy or empty, solid or fragile, clues about family dynamics and feelings of security. For the tree, features like roots, branches, or leaves can indicate self-perception, growth, or personal struggles. And for the person, posture, proportions, and expression can hint at social comfort, confidence, or hidden anxieties. Essentially, the HTP test acts as a window into the subconscious. It's not about artistic skill, it's about the psychological story your hand tells on paper. I remember sitting nervously in a small office, a blank sheet in front of me. The psychologist handed me a pencil and said, "Draw a house, a tree, and a person." I started with the house, small, with uneven windows, because I wanted it to look perfect. But somehow it didn't. Then the tree. I gave it long, twisting branches, not really thinking, just letting my hand move. Finally, the person. A stick figure, but with tiny details. A smile that was maybe too forced, arms that seemed unsure. After I finished, the psychologist didn't say much right away, but later they pointed out patterns in my drawings I hadn't noticed, things about how I saw myself and my world. It felt like my subconscious had quietly spoken through my pencil. In the HTP test, the house often represents family, security, and your sense of home. Psychologists pay attention to size, placement, windows, doors, and details. A large, well-detailed house might suggest confidence and comfort in your environment. A tiny or incomplete house could hint at feelings of insecurity, anxiety, or emotional distance from family. Even small details matter. Closed doors might indicate reluctance to open up to others, while many windows can suggest curiosity or a desire for connection. A house with crooked lines or missing walls may reflect underlying stress or unresolved family conflicts. Placement on the page can also be revealing. Houses drawn at the top of the page may indicate aspiration or optimism, while lower placement might suggest feeling grounded, or sometimes overwhelmed. Importantly, the house isn't just a literal structure, it's a symbolic reflection of your internal world and attachment patterns, showing how you relate to safety, belonging, and the people closest to you. In the HTP test, the tree represents the self, your personal growth, stability, and inner life. Psychologists focus on roots, trunk, branches, and leaves to interpret emotional and psychological traits. A tree with strong roots often reflects a sense of stability and connection to one's environment. A thin or absent root system might indicate feelings of insecurity or lack of grounding. The trunk shows strength and resilience. A thick, solid trunk suggests confidence, while a fragile or uneven trunk can point to vulnerability or low self-esteem. Branches and leaves represent aspirations, creativity, and social connections. Branches that reach outward may show ambition or openness, while drooping or sparse branches could hint at withdrawal or stress. Even the tree's overall size and placement matters. A large, flourishing tree can reflect a healthy self-image, while a small, isolated tree might suggest introversion or self-doubt. Ultimately, the tree gives psychologists a glimpse into how you see yourself and your capacity for growth, offering insight into patterns of resilience, self-expression, and emotional health. In the HTP test, the person drawing represents your social self, your self-esteem, and interpersonal attitudes. Psychologists analyze posture, size, proportions, and even facial expressions. A large figure can indicate confidence or a desire to be noticed, while a tiny figure may reflect insecurity or feeling overlooked. Arms and legs are important too. Outstretched arms can show openness, whereas tucked or missing limbs, may suggest withdrawal or anxiety. Facial features give insight into emotional expression. Smiles, frowns, or blank expressions can reveal optimism, sadness, or emotional restraint. Details like fingers, eyes, or clothing can also hint at attention to detail or self-consciousness. Even the figure's placement on the page matters. A centered person often reflects self-assuredness, while figures drawn in corners or edges may suggest social discomfort or isolation. The person drawing is a window into how you see yourself in the world. It taps into personality frameworks like the Big Five traits, highlighting openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, without ever asking you to fill out a questionnaire. Let's look at a few examples to see the HTP test in action. Imagine a drawing of a small house, a tall tree, and a stick figure tucked into the corner. A psychologist might interpret this as someone who feels insecure at home, has ambitions or personal growth goals, but may be shy or hesitant in social situations. Now picture a house with many windows, a sprawling tree with strong roots, and a confident figure with arms open wide. This combination suggests a person who feels secure, well-grounded, and socially comfortable, someone who expresses themselves freely. Finally, a house with closed doors, a tree with drooping branches, and a figure with minimal detail, might indicate someone who feels isolated or emotionally restricted, possibly struggling with self-esteem or connection. The fascinating part? These patterns often resonate with people, even when they didn't consciously plan them. It's like your subconscious quietly leaves clues about who you are on the page. While the HTP test can be insightful, it's important to remember it's interpretive, not definitive. No drawing can perfectly capture the full complexity of a person's personality. Cultural differences, artistic ability, and age can all influence how someone draws. A child's stick figure might look simple, not because of low self-esteem, but because of their developmental stage. Similarly, someone from a culture with minimal exposure to detailed drawings might produce simpler images. Psychologists also caution against overgeneralizing. Two people may draw similar images for completely different reasons. The HTP should always be used alongside other assessments and professional judgment, not as a standalone diagnosis. Ultimately, it's a tool for exploration, not a crystal ball, offering insights when interpreted carefully and ethically. Even with its limitations, the HTP test remains valuable because it encourages self-reflection. By externalizing thoughts and feelings onto paper, people often notice patterns they hadn't recognized before. It's also a conversation starter in therapy or counseling, helping psychologists gently explore emotions, relationships, and personal growth. For researchers, it provides a window into unconscious processes that standard questionnaires might miss. The real power lies not in labeling someone, but in uncovering insights about how they perceive themselves and the world. When interpreted thoughtfully, the HTP test offers meaningful perspectives on personality, coping, and emotional health. I'll never forget the first time I revisited an old HTP drawing. Looking at that small house, twisting tree, and awkward stick figure, I suddenly noticed patterns in how I viewed myself back then. It wasn't about right or wrong, it was about insight. Seeing it on paper made me reflect on my growth, my fears, and the ways I connect with others. Maybe you'll try it too. Pick up a pencil and draw a house, a tree, and a person. You might discover something surprising about yourself, tucked quietly into lines and shapes you didn't even plan. We love stories where change happens in a moment. One decision, one morning, one breakthrough. But if you're honest, that's not how it feels inside. You know what you should change. You've known it for a while, and yet nothing moves. You promise yourself this will be the week. Then life happens, or fear does, or exhaustion. So you start wondering if something is wrong with you. But here's the truth most people never hear. Struggling to change doesn't mean you're weak. It usually means you're trying to skip steps. And once you see the steps clearly, change stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling possible. Most people think change fails because of low motivation. That idea sounds logical, but psychology doesn't support it. Motivation isn't a stable fuel source. It rises and falls based on context, emotion, and stress. When we rely on willpower alone, we ignore how behavior actually works. Human change follows patterns, not bursts of effort. Research in behavioral psychology shows that readiness matters more than desire. Trying to act before you're psychologically prepared creates resistance. That resistance often shows up as procrastination, avoidance, or self-sabotage. Not because you don't care, but because your mind isn't aligned yet. Change feels hard when strategies don't match your current mental stage. You're pushing for action while your psychology is still catching up. Once we understand that mismatch, we stop blaming ourselves and start working with the mind instead of against it. In the late 1970s, psychologists James Prochaska and Carlo Di Clemente noticed something interesting. People trying to change didn't fail randomly. They failed in predictable ways. From this, they developed the Transtheoretical Model of behavior change. It explains change as a sequence of mental and behavioral stages. Not everyone is ready for action at the same time, and pushing action too early often backfires. The model shows that change isn't a single decision, it's a progression of readiness. Each stage has its own mindset, emotional barriers, and cognitive patterns. What works in one stage can completely fail in another. This is why advice like just do it helps some people and frustrates others. They're simply in different stages of change. Once you identify your stage, the path forward becomes clearer and far less overwhelming. There's a quiet kind of discomfort that comes before any real change. It's not pain yet, just a constant awareness. You notice the habit, you notice the pattern, but nothing shifts. You still wake up with the same intentions and end the day wondering why you didn't follow through. It's frustrating because part of you cares. You wouldn't feel this tension if you didn't. You're not ignoring the problem. You're living with it. And that limbo can feel heavier than failure. Because at least failure means movement. This feels like standing still, watching time pass. If this feels familiar, it's not a flaw. It's a very specific stage of change doing exactly what it does. Pre-contemplation is the stage where change isn't even on the table yet, not because the problem doesn't exist, but because it isn't fully acknowledged. In this stage, people often minimize, rationalize, or externalize the issue. The mind protects itself from discomfort by avoiding awareness. Psychologically, this is driven by defensive cognition. Admitting the need for change threatens identity, comfort, or control. Research shows that pushing advice here usually increases resistance. It triggers reactance, the instinct to defend freedom when it feels threatened. That's why lectures, ultimatums, or pressure often fail at this stage. They make people dig in deeper. What actually moves someone forward is awareness, not action. Gentle exposure to consequences, honest reflection, no force. Pre-contemplation isn't laziness. It's the mind saying, I'm not ready to look at this yet. And that matters more than most people realize. Contemplation is where awareness finally arrives. You recognize the problem, and you also feel stuck with it. This stage is defined by ambivalence. You want change, but you also want things to stay the same. Cognitively, the mind runs constant cost-benefit analyses. What do I gain if I change? What do I lose if I do? Both sides feel equally real. That's why decision paralysis is common here. Studies show people can remain in contemplation for months or even years, not because they lack discipline, but because the trade-offs feel heavy. Emotionally, fear and hope coexist. You imagine a better future and a feared one. Contemplation isn't inaction. It's mental work happening below the surface. And until that inner debate resolves, forcing action usually leads to short-lived change or relapse. This is the stage where your mind never feels quiet. Every decision turns into a debate. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, then tomorrow arrives, and doubt joins the conversation. Part of you pictures the relief of changing, another part imagines everything that could go wrong. So you compromise with yourself. Not now, not today, soon. At night, the thoughts come back stronger. You replay the same arguments over and over. It's exhausting because you're not avoiding the problem anymore. You're carrying it. If you've ever felt this push and pull inside, that's not confusion. That's contemplation. And it's often the last stop before something finally shifts. Preparation is where intention starts turning into structure. You're no longer just thinking. You're getting ready. Psychologically, this stage is driven by rising self-efficacy. You begin to believe, maybe I can actually do this. People in preparation make small, low-risk commitments. They research, plan, adjust schedules, and test ideas. These steps feel minor, but they matter. They reduce uncertainty, which lowers fear. From a cognitive perspective, preparation builds implementation intentions. Clear if-then plans increase follow-through dramatically. This stage is often mistaken for action, but it's still fragile. Skipping preparation leads to burnout. Staying here too long leads to avoidance disguised as planning. Preparation works when it quietly builds confidence, enough to make the first real step feel possible. Action is where change becomes visible. The habit is no longer just a plan, it's happening. At this stage, behavior is deliberate and consistent. You're actively replacing old patterns with new ones. Psychology shows this stage is fragile. Early successes feel exciting, but the brain still defaults to old routines. Cue-based behavior plays a huge role here. Environmental triggers, reminders, and social support increase success dramatically. Research on habit formation highlights the importance of repetition. Consistent action rewires neural pathways over time. Reward matters too. Immediate feedback reinforces behavior. Celebrating small wins keeps motivation alive. But beware, action without strategy can lead to burnout. Without preparation and maintenance, relapse becomes more likely than steady progress. Action is thrilling, but it's only one piece of the full change puzzle. I remember the first time I really tried to change a habit. It felt electric and terrifying at the same time. Every small success made me proud. Every misstep made me question myself. It's strange how progress feels fragile. You're excited, but also terrified you'll ruin it. Friends and family notice, but mostly you feel it internally, like your brain is learning a new language, one habit at a time. The thrill of, I'm actually doing this, mixes with the fear of failure. And that tension, it's normal. This is the magic and the challenge of the action stage. It's when change stops being abstract and starts being lived. Maintenance is about stabilizing change over time. The behavior is no longer new, it's part of daily life. Psychologically, the brain now relies on habit loops. Cues trigger action automatically, and rewards reinforce consistency. Relapse is normal in this stage. Studies show even long-term changes can have setbacks. The key is perspective. A slip doesn't erase progress. It's an opportunity to learn, adjust, and strengthen routines. Self-monitoring and reflection help maintain gains. Tracking progress, anticipating triggers, and planning responses reduces the risk of falling back. Maintenance is where change becomes identity. You're no longer trying to be someone else. You're evolving into the person you want to be. Consistency, not intensity, is the true metric of success here. Relapse isn't a flaw. It's part of the natural rhythm of change. Behavioral science calls this the spiral, not linear pattern. Even people who succeed long-term experience setbacks. The difference is how they respond. Each relapse offers data, triggers, weak points, and gaps in planning. Seeing it this way shifts the mindset from shame to strategy. Cognitive behavioral research shows that reframing setbacks reduces discouragement. Instead of I failed, it becomes I learned something important. Recovery after relapse is often faster than initial change. The mind remembers strategies, making next attempts more effective. Understanding relapse as feedback, not defeat, turns the maintenance stage into a learning cycle, not a trap. I remember a time I slipped back into an old habit I thought I had conquered. At first, shame hit like a wave. But then, something shifted. I realized one slip didn't erase the progress I'd made. Instead of giving up, I paused. I reflected, adjusted, and tried again. It felt different this time. Less panic, more understanding. The fear of failure didn't control me. That's the power of perspective and change. Relapse doesn't define you, your next choice does. If you've ever fallen back, this is your moment. Not to quit, but to rise smarter, stronger, and more prepared. The beauty of the Transtheoretical Model is its versatility. It works for habits, health, work, relationships, almost anything you want to improve. The key is matching strategies to your stage. Pre-contemplation needs awareness, not action. Contemplation requires reflection, not pressure. Preparation is about planning. Action needs repetition and reinforcement. Maintenance relies on consistency and learning from setbacks. Timing matters more than motivation. Even the strongest willpower fails if your stage isn't aligned with the task. Research shows that stage-appropriate interventions increase success dramatically. For example, journaling works in contemplation, while small experiments work in preparation. When you know your stage, change stops feeling random. It becomes predictable, manageable, and much less stressful. Here's the truth most people never hear. Slow change doesn't mean failure. Your brain is following its natural process. You're not weak. You're not lazy. You're learning, testing, and adjusting exactly what the mind needs. Change isn't a sprint, it's a journey, stage by stage. Every pause, every slip, every small win matters. If you honor your current stage, you reduce frustration. You stop blaming yourself and start working with your own psychology. So take a deep breath. You're not broken. You're human. And now you finally know the roadmap to transform your life one stage at a time.